On April 9, 1865, Robert E. Lee signed a ceasefire agreement with the Army of Northern Virginia, withdrawing the Confederacy's primary military force and essentially surrendering to the Union. Civil War concluded with an estimated death toll around 1 million, although there could be way more deaths from the immediate impact of the war. Only 6 days after Lee's surrender, President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated at Ford's Theater by John Wilkes Booth, causing further separation at this point in our nation's history, despite the war being over. This video is an informative essay discussing how Congressional Reconstruction reshaped the South and how its unresolved issues still have a presence in modern debates on civil rights and democracy. We will be taking a couple of minutes on each topic, outlining its cause, effect, and current impact today. The assassination of Abraham Lincoln wasn't the only murder planned by Booth and his accomplices. Andrew Johnson also survived an attempted assassination by a man named George Atzerodt. With Lincoln assassinated, Johnson became his lame duck for the remainder of his presidency. The task of reuniting the nation fell onto his shoulders. President Andrew Johnson's idea of Reconstruction was a forgiving and lenient one, as we'll see. Things like the Freedmen's Bureau were created to aid former slaves, things like food, medical aid, and even schooling, which was incredibly progressive at the time. The Freedmen's Bureau also helped former slaves in the workplace. It tried to make sure that the former slaves received fair wages and freely chose their employers. Special courts were even created to settle disputes between black workers and their white employers, although there were caveats. President Johnson's Reconstruction plan still permitted only white persons to vote for convention delegates or to participate in the new framing of the state's government. By the end of the year, most of the South had held elections under new state constitutions. Often, ex-Confederate leaders won elections for state government offices and for U.S. Congress. Former Confederate states re-entered the Union quickly, with almost no safeguards for the 4 million newly freed people. Former Confederate leaders regained all of the power, which would have been restricted almost under any other policy. Black codes restricted the Freedmen's Bureau especially, and caused a continuation of unequal treatment of the African Americans. The first black codes were enacted in South Carolina in 1865. South Carolina's black code only applied to persons of color, so anybody with 1/8 black blood in them or more. The Southern black codes defined the rights of freedmen. They mainly restricted their rights, but the code did grant black persons a few more civil rights than they possessed before the war. South Carolina's code declared that persons of color now had the right to acquire, own, and dispose of property, to make contracts, to enjoy the fruits of their labor, to sue and be sued, and to receive protection under the law in their persons and property. Also, for the first time, the law recognized the marriages of black persons and the legitimacy of their children. But the law went on to state that marriage between a white person and a person of color shall be illegal and void. Labor contracts were writings that let an African American work for a white man with a master-servant dynamic, under the guise of payment and other terms being in writing. These contracts still had rules, such as the servant had to work from sunup to sunrise, not leave the premises without permission, and could be moderately whipped in the form of discipline if they were under 18. Although this seems not too inhumane with the context of choice, under black codes, the only occupations the black citizen could have legally was servant or farmer. The South had made laws to predispose black citizens into signing labor contracts. This was one of the first forms of systemic racism being implemented in a post-Civil War America. Vagrancy laws were laws to punish the black citizen for being unemployed, and in some cases force them into hard labor through imprisonment. The black community would be heavily policed, skewing incarceration rates. They would give heavy charges for even minor offenses, guaranteeing cheap or even free labor from the African American, despite slavery being abolished. The social and economic inequities caused by these laws, though temporary, had long-term effects, contributing to ongoing disparities in education, housing, and economic opportunity. South Carolina's Black Code established a racially separate court system for all civil and criminal cases that involved a black plaintiff or a defendant. It allowed black witnesses to testify in court, but only in cases affecting the person or property of a person of color. Crimes that whites believed freedmen might commit, such as rebellion, arson, burglary, and assaulting a white woman, carried harsh penalties. Most of these crimes carried the death penalty for blacks, but not for whites. In retrospect, black codes represent the inherent desire of the South to control the African, restricting their every possibility of success. Ultimately, the North was aware of these actions and began protests, claiming that the South was attempting to restore slavery with these black codes. In the end, the states of South Carolina and Mississippi revised these laws so they wouldn't lose their freedom to make laws. Most other former Confederate states wrote black codes that paid more attention to the legal equality of whites and blacks. Along with the black codes, other events helped to alter the course of Reconstruction. The 14th Amendment passed, and a new Congress, hostile to the South, was elected. This Congress took control of Reconstruction. When President Johnson vetoed its Reconstruction legislation, Congress overrode his vetoes. The battle with Johnson led ultimately in 1868 to his impeachment by the House, the first impeachment of a president in American history, although the Senate failed to convict him, losing by 1 vote. The 14th Amendment states that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction of equal protection of the laws. This amendment was made to protect anybody that is inside the U.S. from being dehumanized, having their human rights taken, and being punished without due process. African Americans who were originally being unfairly treated by state law would now have constitutional protection and right to equal treatment. Conclusively, this amendment was made to establish 3 main things: birthright citizenship, equal protection of law, and no prosecution without due process, which applies to anybody and everybody inside the given state and country. Anything not aligning with this amendment is unconstitutional. I will now be passing this video on to my friend, Cademan. If you'd like to go support him, his PayPal will be available at the end of the video.
The Radical Republicans were a group of politicians who formed a faction within the Republican Party that lasted from the mid-1850s to the Reconstruction era. They were led by Thaddeus Stevens in the House of Representatives and Charles Sumner in the Senate. The Radical Republicans were known for their staunch opposition to slavery, support for emancipation, civil rights, social equality for Black Americans, and their desire to enact harsh laws on the southern states in retaliation for the Civil War. Unfortunately, the reputation of the Radical Republicans suffered due to their association with men who are known as carpetbaggers and scalawags. After Reconstruction, Radical Republicans slowly lost control of the South to a group known as the Redeemers, who were members of the Democratic Party for the South. Though the Southern governments had made great attempts to silence and mistreat African Americans, the people of the South didn't think they were doing enough, leading to the foundation of the Ku Klux Klan in 1865. Founded by Nathan Bedford Forrest, the Ku Klux Klan was a terrorist group who used violence against African Americans to assert white supremacy. The KKK were very opposed to blacks having citizenship. They were very violent towards persons of color and would commonly assault and beat them. Within a year, they extended into almost every southern state, and by 1870 became a vehicle for white Southern resistance to the Republican Party's Reconstruction era policies, aimed at establishing policies and economic equality for Black Americans. For the effects of the formation of the 14th and 15th Amendments, the KKK were allegedly disbanded in 1872, but it lived on throughout its supporters, who were also white supremacists. Its members rose up to 5 million in the 1920s, and they are still relevant today. There has been a resurgence of activity involving the Ku Klux Klan in the last 2 decades. In 2015, a violent protest involving over 100 Klan members took place in Southern Carolina. Throughout 1867 through 68, most southern states held new constitutional conventions due to Congressional interference. In these constitutional conventions, freedmen got equal participation and even got to vote. The resulting new state constitutions guaranteed the right of black adult males to vote and run for public office. For the first time, some blacks won election to southern state legislatures and to Congress. By 1868, the remains of the discriminatory black codes had been repealed, though their effects may have still been present for longer. A turn in interest happened around the time of 1877. Reconstruction had dwindled and died out due to multiple factors. The North had lost interest in the black community, and America had faced economic troubles, halting progression. The Democratic Party had resurged, and racial attitudes of American people had been normalized again, with lack of protest against it. At this point, many had felt construction had failed, and the country would begin to spiral from this depression it had faced. Southern states wasted no time trying to end black voting. Southern states would enact a new brand of black codes called Jim Crow laws. These laws had claimed a major biological difference between black and whites, which led to segregation. It would now be illegal for blacks and whites to share public facilities. This means the blacks and whites had to use separate schools, hospitals, libraries, restaurants, hotels, and even drinking fountains. By 1810, every single southern state had completely removed the right to vote from its black population. These Jim Crow laws would stay in effect until the 60s, when the Supreme Court finally declared them unconstitutional and had to reaffirm equal rights for all. The story of Congressional Reconstruction is not but a chapter in history textbooks. It's a blueprint of how America has repeatedly struggled and often failed to deliver on its promises of equality. The radical Republicans sought to redefine freedom and citizenship, yet their vision was undermined by backlash, compromise, and systematic resistance. The legislation of 1860s and 1870s Civil Rights Acts, constitutional amendments, and military oversight built a foundation, but one constantly eroded by violence, discriminatory laws, and political retrenchment. The echoes of Reconstruction are still with us, from debates over voting rights to questions of policies and equal protection under the law, to the persistence of radical disparities in housing, education, and criminal justice. The same struggles that once defined the post-Civil War South continue to shape the United States in 2025. The question still stands. Will history repeat itself, or will we continue in this endless cycle forever?